There will never be in the history of the United States of America a man such as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., divinely chosen by the Almighty Himself, a prophet of his time. There are two fractions that are competing against one another in this nation: the battle for white supremacy, racism, and superiority over black people continues. But the fight for freedom, justice, and equality continues as well. Something I learned a long time ago growing up in the hardcore streets of Philadelphia in the midst of racism, bigotry, gang warring, poverty, is how to defeat your enemy. Most enemies are bullies. They think because they're loud, hateful, and mean and despicable that they're threatening. You never know let your enemy know what you're thinking. Last night I started reading part 1 of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from a Birmingham jail. Today I'll read part 2, and then tomorrow I'll give you part 3. So I'm going to pick up where I left off of, and I might have to, for refreshery purposes, read a paragraph from last night. So let's get started. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from a Birmingham jail, part 2. And let me just say this: just because the official observatory moment has ended doesn't mean that we stop doing the things that have to be done in this nation. Economic empowerment was the next phase of the civil rights movement when Dr. King was alive. Ladies and gentlemen, Black America, hear me and hear me tonight. The more wealth you have, the more leverage you will have, the more access you will have, the more power you will have. The powers that be don't care about protests and people hollering and screaming in the streets, but they'll recognize your money. So the only power I'm concerned about is green power. That's it. And I quote, letter from a Birmingham jail, Dr. King speaking: "I must make 2 honest confessions to you, my Christian and Jewish brothers. First, I must confess that over the last few years, I have been greatly disappointed with the white moderate. I've almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block is the stride toward freedom is not the white citizens conciliator or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to do justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I can't agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically feels that he can't set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the myth of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait until a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will." And I know what that means, because you know when your enemies tell you right up front where they stand, you know how to deal with them. Lukewarm acceptance is more bewildering than outright rejection. In your statement, you asserted that actions, even though peaceful, must be condemned because they precipitate violence. But can this assertion be logically made? Isn't this like condemning the robbed man because his possession of money precipitated the evil act of robbery? Isn't this like condoning Socrates or condemning Socrates because his unswerving commitment to truth and his philosophical delvings precipitated the misguided popular mind to make him drunk or drink the hemlock? Isn't it like condemning Jesus because his unique God consciousness and never ceasing devotion to his will precipitated the evil act of crucifixion? We must come to see, as federal courts have consistently affirmed, that it is immoral to urge an individual to withdraw his efforts to gain his basic constitutional rights because the quest precipitates violence. Society must protect the robbed and punish the robber. Now, this is me speaking, not Dr. King's writings. America's freedom was forged in a bloody revolutionary war. They didn't get their independence from Britain by turning the other cheek. They didn't get it by being mealy mouthed and by singing hymns and praying sweet prayers. It was a protracted, bloody, exhausting war where thousands upon thousands of lives were lost that forged the new frontier for the original 13 colonies, as they were called, to forge a new nation. But when people are protesting peacefully, as Dr. King did, and along with the others, then they were called agitators because they didn't want to continue to go along. Now back to the article, quote, I've also hoped that the white moderate would reject the myth of time. I received a letter this morning from a white brother in Texas which said all Christians know that the colored people will receive equal rights eventually, but is it possible that you are in too great of a religious hurry? It has taken Christianity almost 2,000 years to accomplish what it has, the teachings of Christ, that there is something in the very flow of time that will inevitably cure all ills. Actually, time is neutral. It can be used either destructively or constructively. I'm coming to feel that the people of ill will have used time much more effectively than the people of goodwill. We will have to repent in this generation not merely for the vitriolic words and actions of the bad people, but comes for the appalling silence of the good people. We must come to see that human progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts and persistent work of men willing to be co-workers with God. And without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the forces of social stagnation. You spoke of our activity in Birmingham as extreme first. I was rather disappointed that fellow clergymen would see my nonviolent efforts as those of an extremist. I started thinking about the fact that I stand in the middle of two opposing forces in the Negro community. One is a force of complacency made of Negroes who, as a result of long years of oppression, have been so completely drained of self-respect and a sense of somebodyness that they have adjusted to segregation. And on the other hand, of a few Negroes in the middle of a class who, because of a degree of academic and economic security, and because at points they profit by segregation, have unconsciously become insensitive to the problems of the masses. The other force is one of bitterness and hatred and comes perilously close to advocating violence. It is expressed in the various Black nationalist groups that are springing up over the nation, the largest and best known being Elijah Muhammad's Muslim movement. The movement is nourished by the contemporary frustration over the continued existence of racial discrimination. It is made up of people who have lost faith in America, who have absolutely repudiated Christianity, and who have concluded that the white man is an incurable devil. I've tried to stand between these two forces, saying that we need not follow the do-nothingism of the complacence or the hatred and despair of the black nationalists, there is a more excellent way of love and nonviolent protest. I'm grateful to God. This is what King said, that through the Negro Church, the dimension of nonviolence entered our struggle. If this philosophy had not merged, I am convinced that by now many streets of the South would be flowing with floods of blood. And I'm further convinced that if our white brothers dismiss as rabble rousers and outside agitators those of us who are working through the channels of nonviolent direct action and refuse to support our nonviolent efforts, millions of Negroes, out of frustration and despair, will seek solace and security in black nationalist ideologies, a development that will lead inevitably to a frightening racial nightmare. Oppressed people cannot remain oppressed forever. The urge for freedom will eventually come. This is what has happened to the American Negro. Something within him has reminded him of his birthright of freedom. Something without has reminded him that he can gain it consciously and unconsciously. He has been swept in by what the Germans call Zeitgeist, and with his black cosmic urgency toward the promised land of racial justice, recognizing this vital urge that engulfed the Negro community, one should readily understand public demonstrations. The Negro has many pent-up resentments and latent frustrations. He has to get them out. So let him march sometime. Let him have his prayer pilgrimages to the city hall. Understand why he must have sit-ins and freedom rides. If his repressed emotions do not come out in these nonviolent ways, they will come out in ominous expressions of violence. This is not a threat, it is a fact of history. So I have not said to my people, get rid of your discontent. But I've tried to say that this normal and healthy discontent can be channeled through the creative outlet of nonviolence, direct action. Now, this approach is being dismissed as extremist. I must admit that I was initially disappointed in being so categorized. But as I continued to think about the matter, I gradually gained a bit of satisfaction from being considered an extremist. Was not Jesus an extremist in love? Love your enemies, bless them that curse you, pray for them that despitefully use you. Was not Amos an extremist for justice? Let justice roll down like waters in righteousness, like a mighty stream. Was not Paul an extremist for the gospel of Jesus Christ? I bear in my body the marks of the Lord Jesus. Was not Martin Luther an extremist? Was not Martin Luther an extremist? Here I stand, I can do no other, so help me God. Was not John Bunyan an extremist? I will stay in jail to the end of my days before I make a mockery of my conscience. Was not Abraham Lincoln an extremist? This nation cannot survive half slave and half free. Was not Thomas Jefferson an extremist? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. So the question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists we will be. Will we be extremists for hate, or will we be extremists for love? Will we be extremists for the preservation of injustice, or will we be extremists for the cause of justice? I had hoped that the white moderate would see this. Maybe I was too optimistic. Maybe I expected too much. I guess I should have realized that few members of a race that has oppressed another race can understand or appreciate the deep groans and passionate yearnings of those who have been oppressed, and still fewer have the vision to see that injustice must be rooted out by strong, persistent, and determined action. I am thankful, however, that some of our white brothers have grasped the meaning of the social revolution and committed themselves to it. They are still all too small in quantity, but they are big in quality. Some like Ralph McGill, Lillian Smith, Harry Golden, and James Dabbs, have written about our struggle in elegant, prophetic, and understanding terms. Others have marched with us down, named the streets of the South. They sat in with us at lunch counters and rode in with us on the Freedom Rise. They have languished in filthy, roach infested jails, suffering the abuse and brutality of angry policemen who see them as dirty nigger lovers. They, unlike many of their moderate brothers, have recognized the urgency of the moment and sensed the need for the powerful action antidotes to combat the disease of segregation. And, quote, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., letter from a Birmingham jail. Tomorrow I will bring you the concluding part, which is part 3. But for now, never surrender, never quit.